Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be diving into a story that takes us to the heart of Renaissance Italy,
Right.
a world of beauty and intrigue and, unfortunately, some pretty brutal family drama.
Yeah, it certainly is a story that I think captures the imagination,
Yeah.
mixes history with a healthy dose of dramatic flair.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Our source material today is an episode of the Noble Blood podcast,
Okay.
and it focuses on the tragic life and controversial legacy of Beatrice Cenci.
Mm-hmm.
She was a young noblewoman in 16th century Rome,
Right.
and her story is one that continues to fascinate and provoke debate centuries later.
And I think what's so fascinating about this deep dive is that we're not just looking at the events themselves,
Right.
but we're also trying to figure out why this story has resonated for so long.
Exactly.
What does it tell us about the power dynamics of the time,
Yeah.
the complexities of human nature, and the enduring struggle for justice?
Absolutely. To truly understand this story, though,
Yeah.
we need to start with the villain of our piece, Beatrice's father, Francesco Cenci.
Right.
Now, this guy wasn't just your average Renaissance bad boy.
Right.
He was notorious for his violence and depravity.
His reputation wasn't just idle gossip.
Right.
You know, the sources paint a very chilling picture
Yeah.
of a man who really seemed to revel in cruelty,
Yeah.
even as a child.
Oh, wow.
Francesco displayed disturbing tendencies.
Hey.
Imagine at just 11 years old,
Wow.
he was already involved in a violent incident that landed him in court.
11 years old.
Yeah.
That's shocking, even for a time when life was arguably a bit more, shall we say, rough and tumble.
Exactly. And sadly, his
Yeah.
behavior only escalated from there
Oh, no.
as an adult.
Okay.
Francesco was known to have hanged a vassal after a peasant uprising.
Okay.
Now, for those unfamiliar with the term,
Right.
a vassal was essentially a person who owed allegiance and service to a lord.
Right.
So kind of like a tenant farmer,
Okay.
but with even fewer rights.
Got it.
So this act demonstrates Francesco's willingness to use violence to maintain control.
Yeah. It's certainly a far cry from the romanticized image
Yeah.
of Renaissance nobility.
Exactly.
But sadly, this wasn't an isolated incident.
No.
There are records of him brutally beating a servant girl
Yeah.
so badly that she couldn't eat or speak for days.
Right.
It paints a very disturbing picture of a man
Yeah.
who seemed to operate with complete impunity.
And that impunity was likely due in part
Right.
to the political climate of Rome at the time.
Okay.
We're talking about a period with a rapid succession of short-lived popes and widespread lawlessness.
Right.
It was an environment that was just ripe for exploitation and abuse of power by those wealthy and influential enough to take advantage.
So Francesco was essentially operating within a system
Yes.
that allowed him to get away with, pretty much anything.
Precisely. And his wealth and status likely shielded him
Right.
from the full consequences of his actions. But it's important to remember that this instability
Yeah.
wasn't just a backdrop to Francesco's actions.
Right.
It was a breeding ground for it.
Yeah.
It normalized this culture of violence and corruption that
Right.
affected all levels of society.
Which makes his treatment of his own children
Right.
all the more disturbing.
Yes.
Francesco was particularly cruel to his eldest son, Giacomo.
Yeah.
He openly disliked the boy and minimized his inheritance in his will.
And this was a deliberate and pointed act
Oh, yeah.
in Renaissance Italy.
Yeah?
Inheritance was a crucial aspect of maintaining social standing and power.
Right.
By diminishing Giacomo's inheritance, Francesco was essentially cutting him off at the knees, ensuring his son would struggle to maintain the family status.
And it wasn't just Giacomo who suffered.
Right.
Francesco sent Beatrice and her sister Antonia to a convent
Yeah.
in a rather unsavory part of Rome, known for its, shall we say, loose morals.
Yes, this wasn't a typical convent
Yeah.
for young ladies of their social standing. The choice of location raises some uncomfortable questions about Francesco's motives.
Right.
Was it simply a matter of convenience, or was there something more sinister at play?
Right.
Was he attempting to control their lives, their reputations, perhaps even expose them to danger?
Wow.
It's a disturbing detail that adds another layer of complexity to his character.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And then we have the incident that really set the stage for the tragedy to come,
Yep.
Francesco's sodomy trial.
Right.
Now, a sodomy trial in 16th century Rome was a serious matter.
Yes.
This wasn't just a rumor or a whispered accusation.
Right.
Multiple witnesses and victims came forward to testify against Francesco.
And to be clear, the term sodomy at this time
Right.
encompassed a range of sexual acts considered taboo.
Yeah.
The fact that Francesco was even brought to trial for such a crime,
Right.
which carried the death penalty, speaks to the severity of the accusations against him.
But as we might expect, Francesco managed to escape severe punishment.
Oh.
His connections, his wealth, his influence all came into play,
Right.
allowing him to essentially buy his way out of trouble.
Right.
He was forced to pay a massive fine,
Yeah.
which further depleted his already dwindling fortune,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a small price to pay for avoiding a much harsher sentence.
This is where we start to see the cracks in Francesco's facade.
Okay.
Despite his wealth and power,
Yeah.
his actions were starting to catch up with him.
Right.
He was becoming more and more reckless. And his behavior was attracting unwanted attention.
And sadly, it was his family, particularly Beatrice,
Right.
who would bear the brunt of his escalating rage and frustration
Yeah.
in a fit of pique after Giacomo announced his marriage.
Right.
Francesco decided to uproot his life, moving to a new palace and forcing Beatrice and his new wife Lucrezia to move with him.
And this move was more than just a change of scenery.
Okay.
Francesco chose a remote castle called La Rocca,
Yeah.
essentially isolating Beatrice and Lucrezia from the outside world. It was a calculated act of control,
Right.
a way to further restrict their freedom and
Yeah.
keep them under his thumb.
La Rocca becomes a symbol of Beatrice's isolation and despair.
Yes.
It was a prison disguised as a home where she was constantly under the threat
Right.
of her father's violence and cruelty.
And during their time at La Rocca,
Yeah.
tragedy struck the family again.
Oh, no.
Two of Beatrice's brothers, Christopher and Paolo,
Right.
died under somewhat mysterious circumstances.
Real.
While the exact cause of their deaths is unclear,
Right.
the presence of violence and suspicion surrounding these events
Yeah.
adds another layer of darkness to the already grim atmosphere at La Rocca.
It's a reminder that even within the walls of a seemingly impenetrable castle,
Right.
the threat of danger was always present.
Yes.
For Beatrice and Lucrezia, life at La Rocca was a constant state of fear and uncertainty.
They weren't entirely without hope, though.
Okay.
Desperate to escape Francesco's clutches. Both Beatrice and Lucrezia wrote letters to relatives in Rome, pleading for help.
Wow.
There's even a mention of Beatrice attempting to reach out to the Pope himself, hoping for intervention.
It's remarkable that even in her desperate situation,
Yeah.
Beatrice still believed in the possibility of justice, that someone, somewhere, would hear her pleas and come to her rescue.
But those pleas were intercepted by Francesco.
Oh, no.
And instead of prompting any remorse or change of heart,
Right.
this discovery only served to inflame his anger.
Of course.
He unleashed a torrent of cruelty on Beatrice,
Wow.
making her life at La Rocca even more unbearable.
This intercepted letter marks a turning point in the story.
Yes.
It's the moment when Beatrice realizes the true extent of her father's depravity,
Right.
the absolute futility of hoping for his mercy.
She's trapped, isolated,
Yeah.
and facing unimaginable suffering.
Right.
And it's at this point, facing such dire circumstances, that Beatrice makes a fateful decision. She's going to take matters into her own hands. And this is where Beatrice's story shifts
Yeah.
from one of passive suffering to one of active resistance.
Right.
She's no longer willing to be a victim,
Right.
and she's ready to take drastic measures to break free from her tormentor.
And these weren't just idle thoughts.
No.
Beatrice, along with Lucrezia, began to hatch a plot to kill Francesco.
Right.
They enlisted the help of Olimpio Calvetti, who was the castle administrator,
Mm.
and another servant named Marcio Catalano.
It's a significant shift in the narrative.
Yeah.
Beatrice goes from being isolated and powerless to orchestrating this daring and dangerous plan.
Right.
She's taking control, forming alliances,
Yeah.
and actively seeking a way out of her horrific situation.
It makes you wonder about the level of desperation she must have felt
Right.
to even contemplate such a drastic act.
Yeah.
But I suppose when you're trapped with a person
Mm.
who represents a constant threat to your safety and well-being,
Right.
perhaps desperate measures start to feel like the only option.
It's certainly a testament to the resilience of the human spirit,
Yeah.
that even in the face of such overwhelming darkness,
Yeah.
there's still a flicker of hope, a drive to survive,
Right.
to fight back against injustice.
So tell me about the plan itself.
Okay.
How did they intend to pull this off?
Right.
I imagine killing a man like Francesco,
Yeah.
even one weakened by illness as he was at the time,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have been a simple task.
You're right, it was a risky plan.
Right.
But they saw it as their only way out.
Okay.
On September 7th, 1598,
Okay.
while Francesco was recovering from an illness,
Right.
Olimpio, and Marcio entered his chambers and bludgeoned him to death.
Wow.
It was a brutal act reflecting the pent-up rage and desperation
Yeah.
that fueled this act of rebellion.
It's hard to imagine the level of fear and adrenaline
Right.
that must have been coursing through them
Yeah.
as they carried out this plan.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened next? Did they manage to get away with it?
Well, they tried to cover up the crime,
Right.
hoping to make it look like an accident.
Okay.
But their attempt was, to put it mildly, less than convincing.
Right.
They lacked the experience, the cold-bloodedness,
Yeah.
perhaps even the stomach for such a deception.
Right.
Their botched cover-up speaks volumes about their emotional state, the overwhelming pressure they must have been under.
It's a classic case of the cover-up being worse than the crime, isn't it?
It is.
The more you try to hide something,
Right.
the more suspicious it becomes.
Yeah.
So what happened when the authorities got involved?
Well, news of Francesca's accident quickly spread.
Right.
And of course, rumors about foul play began to swirl.
Okay.
Now remember, the public already had a very low opinion of Francesco Cenci.
Right.
He was known for his brutality, his depravity.
Right.
So it's not surprising that many people were quick to believe
Yeah.
that something more sinister had occurred.
It sounds like public opinion was already on Beatrice's side,
Yeah.
even before the truth was revealed.
Exactly. There was a sense of, if not outright support for her actions,
Right.
then at least an understanding of why she might have resorted to such extreme measures.
The papal authorities, however,
Right.
had to follow procedure.
Right.
They launched an investigation.
Wow.
But initially, they treated the Cenci family with a certain level of civility,
Mm-hmm.
even allowing them house arrest.
Okay.
I'm guessing that had something to do with their social standing.
You are.
The Cenci family, despite Francesco's unsavory reputation,
Yeah.
were still nobility.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
Their social status afforded them certain privileges,
Right.
at least at the start.
Okay.
But as the investigation progressed
All right.
and evidence mounted,
Yep.
public pressure intensified.
Okay.
The authorities realized they couldn't simply sweep this under the rug.
Right.
They moved the Cenci family to prison,
Okay.
and the investigation took a darker turn.
So what was the turning point?
Right.
What ultimately led to their downfall?
It was a combination of factors, really.
Okay.
The weight of evidence against them was substantial,
Right.
but the final nail in the coffin, so to speak,
Yeah.
came from an unexpected source,
Okay.
Olimpio's wife,
Wow.
fearing for his own safety.
Okay.
Olimpio was allegedly murdered on Giacomo's orders.
Oh, wow. So even within this conspiracy,
Right.
there was distrust and violence.
Yeah.
It seems that the cycle of brutality was difficult to break free from.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And this act, even if intended to protect the conspiracy,
Yeah.
backfired spectacularly.
Right.
Olimpio's wife, enraged and heartbroken by her husband's death,
Right.
revealed everything she knew to the authorities.
Okay.
She knew about the bloody sheets, the hidden evidence
Yeah.
that confirmed their guilt.
So it was a combination of their own mistakes
Yes,
and the betrayal of someone they thought was an ally that
Right.
sealed their fate.
exactly. Under torture, both Giacomo and Lucrezia confessed,
Okay.
but they pointed the finger at Beatrice,
Right.
claiming she was the mastermind behind the plot.
It's interesting how even under duress,
Right.
the instinct to save oneself often overrides loyalty and truth.
Human nature is a complex and often contradictory thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, Beatrice maintained her innocence even under torture,
Right.
but the evidence against the entire family was simply overwhelming.
It's tragic, really.
Yeah.
Francesco's years of brutality, his abuse of power,
Right.
his utter disregard for the law
Hmm.
may have gone largely unpunished during his lifetime,
Right.
but they ultimately led to the downfall of his entire family.
It's a chilling reminder that our actions have consequences,
Yeah.
not just for ourselves, but for those around us, those
Right.
we love, those who come after us.
So what happened next?
Okay.
What was the sentence handed down by the papal authorities?
Well, Pope Clement VII was determined to make an example of the Cenci family.
Okay.
He wanted to curb noble crime, showcase his authority,
Right.
and perhaps even profit from the seizure of the Cenci assets. His decision was driven by multiple factors, but ultimately he sentenced all three,
Right.
Beatrice, Lucrezia, and Giacomo, to death.
The harsh sentence.
It certainly was,
Yeah.
especially considering the context of Francesco's abuse. On September 11th, 1599,
Okay.
a year after Francesco's murder,
Right.
the Cenci family was brought to the execution platform in Rome.
Okay.
The scene was set for a dramatic finale,
Yeah.
one that would solidify Beatrice's place in history and capture the hearts and minds of generations to come.
And I imagine the public's reaction to this execution
Right.
was a key factor in how Beatrice's story was perceived and ultimately transformed into something more than just a simple crime.
You're absolutely right. What happened next was crucial in shaping Beatrice's legacy.
Okay.
The crowd, despite witnessing a gruesome execution,
Right.
was clearly on Beatrice's side.
Okay.
They saw her as a victim, a martyr who had fought against her oppressor,
Yeah.
a symbol of resistance against tyranny.
It's fascinating how public sentiment can sometimes run counter to the official narrative, how people can recognize injustice even when the law seems to ignore it.
It speaks to a deeper human understanding of morality,
Right.
a sense of empathy and compassion that goes beyond the letter of the law.
So how did the executions unfold?
Okay.
Were they all treated equally in death?
Lucrezia was executed first, followed by Beatrice.
Okay.
Despite the horrific circumstances, Beatrice faced her death with remarkable composure.
Right?
This stoicism, this quiet dignity in the face of such a brutal end,
Yeah.
further fueled the public's perception of her innocence and martyrdom.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
A young woman unjustly condemned,
Huh.
facing her death with courage and grace.
Then came Giacomo's turn.
Okay.
His execution was far more brutal.
Right.
A deliberate act of violence meant to restore order
Yeah.
and quell any potential uprising inspired by Beatrice's defiance.
Right.
It was a clear message from the Pope,
Okay.
a reminder of who held the ultimate power.
But even this display of force didn't diminish the public's focus on Beatrice.
Yeah.
She remained the central figure in this tragedy,
Right.
the one who had captured their hearts and minds.
Even as Giacomo's body was displayed as a warning,
Right.
people gathered around Beatrice's remains,
Wow.
leaving flowers, holding vigil, mourning her loss.
Okay.
It was an act of defiance, a refusal to accept the official narrative,
Right.
a way of reclaiming her story and
Uh-huh.
transforming her into a symbol of hope and resistance.
And this public outpouring of grief and support continued even after the executions.
Absolutely. When it came time for the Cenci family to be buried,
Okay.
Beatrice's funeral procession was by far the largest.
Wow.
People from all walks of life joined the procession,
Right.
walking for over a mile in the scorching heat
Wow.
to accompany her to her final resting place.
Okay.
It was a remarkable display of solidarity,
Yeah.
a testament to the impact she had on the people of Rome.
It's incredible to think that even though her grave was unmarked, due to her criminal status, Beatrice's memory lived on in the hearts and minds of the Roman people.
Yeah, it really speaks to the power of her story.
Yeah.
Even in death, Beatrice transcended that label of criminals
Right.
and became something more, a folk hero, a symbol of resistance,
Right.
a martyr whose story resonated with those who felt oppressed or unjustly treated. And her story didn't just stay within the confines of Rome.
Right.
It spread throughout Italy and beyond,
Wow.
inspiring artists, writers, and playwrights,
Okay.
each adding their own interpretation to her legend.
So her story wasn't just passed down through oral tradition or historical accounts.
Right.
It actually made its way into the art and literature of the time.
Absolutely. There's even a plaque in Rome
Oh, wow.
marking the spot where Beatrice began her final walk to the execution platform.
Wow.
It calls her an exemplary victim of unjust justice.
Wow.
And I think that inscription perfectly captures the sentiment surrounding Beatrice Cenci. She's remembered not just for her tragic fate,
Right.
but for the courage she displayed in the face of unimaginable suffering.
It's a powerful testament to how a single individual's story
Right.
can challenge the official narrative,
Yeah.
inspire generations,
Mm-hmm.
and become a symbol for something much larger than themselves.
And that's where the art inspired by Beatrice's story comes in.
Okay.
One striking example is Caravaggio's painting Judith beheading Holofernes.
Okay.
Now, Caravaggio actually witnessed the Cenci execution.
Really?
This wasn't some abstract historical event for him.
Right.
It was a visceral experience
Yeah.
that undoubtedly had a profound impact on his art.
So he wasn't just painting a scene.
Right.
He was capturing a moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
a moment that resonated with him deeply.
Yes.
A moment that reflected the societal anxieties and the struggle for justice
Right.
that were so prevalent in Rome at that time.
Precisely. And in Judith beheading Holofernes,
Yeah.
we see echoes of Beatrice's story. Judith, a symbol of feminine strength and righteous revenge,
Right.
embodies the struggle against tyranny,
Mm-hmm.
the desperate act of violence taken to break free from oppression.
Right.
The parallels are quite striking.
It's fascinating how Caravaggio depicts Judith in that painting.
Yeah,
She's not portrayed as a fierce warrior, is she?
right.
There's a sense of reluctance, of disgust,
Right.
even as she carries out the act.
That's a brilliant observation.
Yeah.
That reluctance, that internal conflict,
Right.
mirrors the complexity of Beatrice's situation.
Right.
She was driven to violence not out of bloodlust,
Right.
but out of a desperate need for survival and a yearning for justice.
Yeah.
Caravaggio captures that moral ambiguity beautifully.
It makes you think about how we often simplify historical figures,
Yeah.
reducing them to heroes or villains.
Right.
But the reality is far more nuanced.
It is.
Real people are complex, capable of both great acts of courage and acts of desperation.
Exactly. And that's what makes Beatrice Cenci's story so compelling.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, no simple categorization.
Right.
She forces us to confront the complexities of human nature, the gray areas of morality, and the enduring struggle between good and evil.
Speaking of complex interpretations,
Yes.
what about that famous portrait in the Palazzo Barberini in Rome?
Right.
The one long thought to be of Beatrice.
Okay.
The one showing a young woman dressed in white with a somber yet defiant expression.
Yes. That portrait has become iconic, hasn't it?
It has.
But it turns out that it's most likely not actually of Beatrice.
Really?
It's more likely a depiction of a sibyl or a prophetess from a much earlier period.
Okay.
But the fact that it was so strongly associated with Beatrice for so long speaks volumes about the image she has come to represent.
It's almost as if people wanted to believe it was her,
Right.
that they needed a face to put to this story.
Yeah.
An image that embodied the qualities they associated with her.
Right.
Innocence, tragedy, and defiance.
It speaks to how powerful a story can be, how it can transcend the limitations of historical fact and take on a life of its own.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just exploring a historical event.
Right.
We're delving into a cultural phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Beatrice Cenci's story has become woven into the fabric of Roman history.
Right.
It's art, it's literature, it's collective memory.
Yes.
She's become a symbol, an archetype,
Right.
a figure that embodies the city's long and complicated relationship
Yeah.
with power, justice, and rebellion.
So what does it all mean?
Right.
Why does the story of Beatrice Cenci continue to resonate with us centuries after her death?
Good question.
I think it's because her story taps into something universal.
Okay.
It's a story of power and abuse,
Right.
of despair and resistance, of the struggle for justice in a world where the scales are often tipped in favor of the powerful.
Yeah.
It's a story that resonates with anyone who has ever felt powerless,
Right.
who has ever yearned for freedom, who has ever dared to challenge the status quo.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Right.
the human spirit can find a way to shine through,
Yeah.
to inspire hope, to spark change.
And it's a story that challenges us to confront injustice,
Yeah.
to stand up for what we believe in,
Right.
and to remember that even the most vulnerable among us
Yeah.
can challenge those in power.
It's true.
Beatrice Cenci's story is a powerful reminder that silence is not always the answer. Sometimes the most courageous act is to speak truth to power,
Yeah.
to fight for what's right,
Right.
even if it means risking everything.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it, isn't it?
It is.
It makes you question your assumptions, challenges your perceptions,
Right.
and encourages you to look deeper, to search for the nuances and complexities that lie beneath the surface of history.
Precisely. Beatrice Cenci's story is a gift, really.
Yeah.
It's a gift that keeps on giving,
Right.
prompting us to ask difficult questions, to grapple with moral dilemmas,
Right.
and to engage in the ongoing dialogue about power, justice, and the human condition.
Well said.
Yeah.
And if you're looking to explore this captivating tale further,
Right.
I highly recommend checking out the Noble Blood podcast episode we discussed today.
Yes.
It's a great starting point for your own deep dive into the world of Beatrice Cenci.
And remember, history is full of fascinating stories waiting to be uncovered.
Right.
Don't be afraid to dig deeper,
Yeah.
to question the narratives you encounter, and to
Yeah.
draw your own conclusions.
Right.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Until next time, keep exploring.